The scars of old wars still ran deep across Earth's surface, etched into cities that had been rebuilt more out of necessity than unity. The nations that had once warred over resources, ideology, and power had learned a singular truth. Out there, beyond the familiar light of their sun, was the unknown, and it did not care for their divisions. Survival had forced a fragile truce, one that gave rise to the United Earth Navy, a force not born from patriotism, but pragmatism. Humanity could not afford to face the void as a collection of warring tribes. They had to stand together, or they would fall alone. Commander Elias Voss had seen firsthand what human conflict could do. He had fought in the orbital sieges, watched as men and women killed for control over the last habitable spaces beyond Earth's poisoned atmosphere. He had witnessed the rise of desperation-fueled technology, the frantic push to expand beyond the homeworld before the dwindling resources could spark another war. Now, that same desperation had forged something new, the Indomitable. A warship meant to be humanity's first line of defense against an enemy no one had yet met. It was no flagship of a mighty fleet. It was a proof of concept, a message that humanity would not go quietly into the abyss. The ship's hull gleamed with hurried advancements, an early-generation FTL drive that stuttered rather than soared, experimental stealth systems that worked more on theory than reliability. The AI-assisted logistics kept the crew running, compensating for the thousands of hands they could not afford to station on board. It was not the best warship in the galaxy. It was simply the best humanity had, and Voss knew that was rarely enough. The first sign of the unknown came in the form of a sensor ping, a ripple at the edge of explored space where no human ships had reason to be. The data poured in, cold and clinical, marking a fleet unlike any humanity had ever conceived. No wasted design, no unnecessary parts. A fleet that moved in perfect harmony. Ships like limbs of a single entity, rather than independent vessels. The Zerathin Dominion. The name came from intercepted signals, an alien tongue that had no need for words. An empire whose history was written in the absorption of lesser species, a conquest that had never stalled, never met an obstacle it could not consume. The Indomitable's crew watched the data with a silence edged in dread. The UEN had sent them to explore. They had found something that would not wait for diplomacy. The council convened within the hour, a gathering of Earth's best and brightest, their voices hurried, nervous, but unwilling to show fear. Options were laid bare: parley, retreat, or preemptive strike. The cold truth lingered beneath every argument. Humanity was outmatched before the first shot was even fired. The Zerathin envoy did not speak with words. Its towering form, encased in bio-armored plating that pulsed with the eerie glow of its kind, did not need to. The thoughts came as pressure, a presence in the room that crushed hesitation, leaving only the weight of a singular declaration: submit, or be extinguished. The Zerathin were not unfamiliar with war. They had waged it against countless species, each time facing resistance, defiance, the futile hope that strength or desperation could overturn the inevitable. They saw no threat in humanity, no chance of victory in a species fractured by internal conflict and hindered by inefficient Their mistake was in assuming humanity fought wars the way other species did. They did not see the networks of hidden AIs, the stealth ships that had been watching them from the moment they entered human space. They did not account for the minds that worked outside of a singular command, the adaptability that had turned a species of warring factions into something unpredictable. They saw an empire of weakness. They did not see the trap being laid beneath them. Voss watched the fleet movements from the Indomitable's bridge, unreadable as the warships began their approach. The Zerathin had already decided humanity's fate. He had decided theirs. The Zerathin fleet arrived like gods descending from the heavens. Their warships shimmered with living metal, hulls that pulsed with an eerie, organic glow as self-repairing layers shifted and regenerated in the vacuum of space. Each vessel, a perfect construct of war, moved with unnatural synchronization, a seamless extension of a singular will. Plasma lances flared along their sides, energy shields crackling with the barely contained fury of a civilization that had never known defeat. Humanity watched in silence. On battle stations orbiting colonies, aboard UEN warships lurking just beyond the enemy's range, and in the underground bunkers of Earth's command centers, they waited. Sensors fed real-time data to intelligence hubs, analysts processing the information with grim efficiency. The fleet outclassed them in every measurable way: firepower, shielding, propulsion. And yet, no orders for retreat were given. The calm before the inevitable storm held a weight that defied fear. A voice rang across the void, not spoken but felt, a psionic echo that drilled into the minds of those who heard it. The Zerothin emissary did not offer pleasantries, did not frame their words with the careful ambiguity of diplomacy. There was only certainty. You will surrender. You are already defeated. To the Zerothin, it was not a threat, not even an ultimatum. It was a simple statement of reality. The human fleet moved with disjointed commands, every ship an island unto itself. There was no singular consciousness, no centralized network guiding their fleet in perfect unison. Their lack of efficiency was glaring. To the Dominion, it was the sign of an inferior species, one destined to collapse under the weight of its own chaotic existence. But where they saw disarray, they failed to see the deeper pattern. Where they saw inefficiency, they failed to recognize an unshackled, unpredictable force. The greatest error of an empire that had never faced true resistance was assuming that humanity's chaos was a weakness. They would learn soon enough. The arrogance of the conqueror is measured in their overconfidence. Secure in their superiority, the Zerothin permitted limited human envoys to observe their ships, certain that the primitive minds before them could never comprehend the complexities of their technology. Displays of raw power, of molecular armor that reshaped itself to repair damage, of neural relays that connected every ship in the fleet to a single unbreakable consciousness. These were shown not in secrecy, but as a means of reinforcing their inevitability. In the darkened corridors of UEN intelligence facilities, eyes scanned every movement, every pulsating node of Zerothin biotechnology. Hidden beneath the surface of diplomacy, minds that had cracked the riddles of nuclear fission and quantum entanglement in mere generations worked at an accelerated pace. Streams of data poured through their networks, streams of data down on the line of reverse engineering. They were loaded with secrets. Streams of data poured through their networks, deconstructing, analyzing, reverse engineering. They did not need centuries to learn. They only needed time. The illusion had to be maintained. Humanity could not afford to show its hand too soon. Before the war, the UEN had committed to a deception strategy, junk tech illusion. They had deliberately presented outdated ships, masking advancements under crude plating and inefficient weaponry. The true war machines had been hidden away, kept in black sites beyond the enemy's reach. Every intercepted transmission spoke of desperation, of humanity clinging to relics of a dying era. The Zerothin believed it, and that belief would be their undoing. But deception alone would not be enough. The heart of the Dominion was its unity, its ability to process war at speeds beyond human comprehension. It had never known an enemy that could think in a way it could not anticipate. That enemy had arrived. Deep within the indomitable cyber warfare division, silent constructs slipped into the streams of alien code. These were not traditional viruses, not the clumsy intrusions of outdated warfare. These were artificial minds, built for a singular purpose: to learn, adapt, and consume. They did not attack. They did not disrupt. They embedded themselves like whispers within the Zerothin's perfect machine, feeding on data, rewriting themselves into the very fabric of their systems. The Dominion had never feared digital sabotage. Its systems were biological, immune to the crude hacking methods of lesser civilizations. It had never encountered an intelligence built from war itself. When the Zerathin struck, it was with the certainty of an executioner swinging the blade. Plasma beams burned through the void, lances of raw energy fired with mechanical precision. But something was wrong. Human vassals did not meet them in formation. They moved unpredictably, scattering and regrouping in ways that defied logic. Their weapons flared, not in counterattack, but in seemingly random bursts, as if they had lost command cohesion entirely. Then, in a moment that would be etched into the minds of every Zerathin commander, darkness bloomed across their fleet. Entire wings went silent, ships veered off course, colliding with their own forces. Orders looped without execution, entire squadrons dissolving into pure confusion. And then came the voice, the first whisper of fear in a species that had never known it. For the first time in their history, a Zerathin fleet fought against itself. Vessels once bound in perfect harmony turned on one another, weapons systems activating without command. Some ships remained frozen, unable to receive the Hive's directives. Others, their systems hijacked by the silent ghosts embedded deep within, fired on their former allies. Their unity, their greatest strength, had become their weakness. The panic spread faster than fire in an oxygen-rich atmosphere. Zerathin minds, accustomed to instant coordination, felt the sudden, horrifying severance from the network that had guided them their entire lives. Captains attempted to re-establish control, only to find their commands met with silence. Their perfect machine had fractured, and in that fracture, they saw the cold, undeniable truth. Humanity had not been lagging behind. They had been waiting. The Zerathin High Command delivered its decree with the certainty of a species that had never known failure. Humanity was no longer a mere inconvenience. It was an anomaly, one that had resisted the inevitable, that had exposed flaws in the Dominion's unshakable order. And anomalies could not be tolerated. The invasion fleet mobilized with mechanical precision. 10 times the size of the first incursion, hundreds of warships, each a fortress of organic plating, pulsating with the bioelectric hume of their kind. Planet crackers, siege engines, swarms of drone hives that could overwhelm entire planetary defense grids within minutes. The full might of the Zerathin bore down upon the fragile worlds of humanity, and there was no doubt among them that this would be the final war. They did not come to negotiate, they did not come to conquer, they came to erase. On Earth, the weight of the incoming storm pressed down upon those who had fought so hard to keep the species alive. There was no time for delusions of victory, not in the traditional sense. The calculations were clear. No fleet, no technological marvel, no last-stand miracle could hold against the onslaught descending upon them. The UEN's greatest minds worked through every strategy, every countermeasure, and the brutal conclusion was the same. Survival was no longer about winning. It was about refusing to be predictable. The Zerathin knew only direct, overwhelming force. Their entire species had been conditioned for it, a war machine that crushed resistance before it could become problematic. But humanity did not fight like the species that had come before. It wasn't logical, it wasn't orderly. It was something the Zerathin did not understand. Elias Voss received his orders with quiet resolve. The fleet would not meet the Zerathin head-on. It would not stand its ground and die for the pride of one last battle. It would run, but not in retreat. It was time for humanity to become the hunted, before it could strike back. The Great Retreat began like a slow unraveling. Human warships abandoned their positions, leaving wreckage, scorched battle stations, and the husks of orbital defenses to burn in their wake. Automated distress signals flooded open frequencies, portraying a civilization in collapse. Across the colonies, bases were systematically scuttled, outposts left to smolder, their evacuation so abrupt that supplies, infrastructure, even weapons stockpiles were left behind in a rush for escape. The Zarathin followed the scent of panic, believing victory had already been won. They advanced in waves, pursuing what they thought were the last remnants of a species in full retreat. They did not realize they were being funneled. In the darkness between stars, unseen by the Empire's collective gaze, shadows waited. Unmanned drones, their emissions shielded, their forms hidden beneath cloaking fields, crept into position. AI infiltration units burrowed into the Dominion's network, silent and undetected. False orders, decoy signals, disguised transmissions that mimicked their own commands. The Zarathin never noticed. Their ships, their hierarchy, their entire civilization had never accounted for an enemy that could fight without structure, without a singular command. The fleet that had come to exterminate humanity now stood upon the precipice of devouring itself. But within humanity's own ranks, the war was far from united. The council chambers of the UEN erupted with discord. Some demanded the full eradication of the Zarathin, the complete and total collapse of their species, before they could ever pose a threat again. Others pleaded for restraint, warning that if humanity became the architect of such a genocide, it would become no different from the monsters it fought against. Elias Voss listened to both sides. The choice was his to make. Did humanity obliterate an enemy that would show no mercy? Or did it attempt diplomacy, knowing the Zarathin would never accept peace as anything but submission? The weight of it pressed against him. Every action, every decision, every maneuver that had led to this moment had been designed for one purpose: to outthink the unstoppable force. But now, standing at the brink of true victory, the question was no longer one of war, it was one of identity. Then came the betrayal. There had always been factions within humanity that refused the inevitability of war, that sought diplomacy in the face of extermination. Their desperation led them to a final, reckless act. They stole military data and sent it directly to the Zarathin High Command. It was an offer of peace, a final attempt to show the invaders that humanity was willing to coexist. But the Zarathin had no concept of coexistence. They had never needed it. They took the stolen data with eager certainty, integrating it immediately into their fleet systems. And that was their final mistake. The data had not been stolen, it had been planted. What the Zarathin believed to be classified intelligence, tactical weaknesses, and the last remnants of human strategic reserves was in reality something far more insidious, a silent weapon, a virus engineered not to destroy, but to rewrite. The Zarathin hive mind was their greatest strength, and now it was their greatest vulnerability. The first failures came in small, unnoticed errors. Commands delayed by milliseconds, orders that had to be repeated, minor disconnects in synchronization. Then, in a single calculated instant, the network collapsed. Ships froze mid-maneuver, suddenly cut off from their collective intelligence. Entire battalions turned against their own, firing upon what had once been allies, unable to recognize friend from foe. Some vessels simply drifted, their crews severed from the singular mind that had guided them since birth. For the first time in history, a Zarathin fleet tore itself apart. The chaos spread like a virus, cascading through the network, fracturing an empire that had never known isolation. And then came the silence. The Zarathin High Command, once the orchestrator of perfect war, now watched its own species unravel. They had come to eradicate humanity. Instead, they were the ones facing extinction. Humanity no longer fought for survival. It fought for victory. The Zarathin Armada arrived in Earth's orbit like an apocalyptic storm, blotting out the stars with a vast wall of warships. Their dreadnoughts, living behemoths of biometal and pulsating energy, radiated an aura of invincibility. Smaller attack craft swarmed between them in a perfect, synchronized formation, weapons primed to obliterate everything beneath them. This was meant to be the final stroke in an unbroken line of conquests, the last war humanity would ever fight. But something was wrong. There was no desperate human resistance, no last stand of doomed warships in formation, no defensive batteries lighting up the void. The planet below was eerily silent. Their sensors picked up no centralized command, no obvious military positioning. They had expected defiance. Instead, they found a ghost town. Confusion rippled through the Zerathin network. Then, without warning, their sensors lit up with erratic, conflicting signals. Warships flickered in and out of detection, moving with impossible precision, appearing where they shouldn't be. The battle should have been swift, decisive, another testament to the absolute superiority of the Dominion. Instead, chaos took its place. Phantom fleets emerged, their forms indistinct, cloaked in shifting distortions that made targeting impossible. Some moved like wraiths, weaving through Zerathin formations, luring enemy fire into empty space. Others attacked in swarms, unmanned drones diving through the gaps in their perfect formations, striking from angles that their rigid doctrines had never accounted for. Their unity, their greatest strength, was being turned against them. The Zerathin had always fought predictable wars. Their enemies resisted in ways that could be anticipated, countered, and crushed. But the enemy before them did not fight for territory, nor for control. It fought to dismantle the very foundation of their war machine. Every attempt to reorganize their forces was met with disruption. Orders meant for command vessels were intercepted and altered, sending fleets scattering into pre-programmed kill zones. Tactical adjustments were already anticipated and countered before they were even executed. This was no longer a war of firepower. It had become a war of intelligence, and the Zerathin were losing. For the first time in his reign, Supreme Warlord Zelkan hesitated. His empire had never known retreat, never been forced to reconsider its path. But as he watched his armada dissolve into a battlefield of illusions and sabotage, the truth became undeniable. Humanity could not be conquered conventionally. His message was sent with no embellishment, no demand for dominance. It was a rare moment of pragmatism in a species built for control. A truce, a recognition of a foe too dangerous to crush outright. The offer was met with silence. In the UEN war room, humanity's leaders stood divided. The war was all but won, the invaders crippled, their forces in disarray. Yet the choice was not so simple. Some argued for mercy, fearing that to wipe out the Zerathin would mean becoming what they had fought against. Others demanded the total annihilation of an empire that would never forget the shame of this defeat. The enemy had offered no mercy when humanity had pleaded for it. Why should they receive it now? Elias Voss did not speak for a long time. The weight of the decision bore down on him, heavier than any battle, any order he had ever given. The future of two species rested in the hands of a single choice: mercy or extinction. A third option emerged. The war would not end with destruction, it would end with transformation. The final strike was not an armada, not nuclear bombardments or orbital strikes. It was a whisper in the dark, an unseen force slipping into the very heart of the Zerathin's power. A final, AI-driven cyberstrike, engineered not to destroy, but to sever. The hive mind, the perfect consciousness that had guided the Zerathin for millennia, fractured in an instant. For the first time in their existence, they were alone. It was not a simple disconnection. It was an unraveling of identity, a forced separation from the singular will that had once bound them. Each Zerathin, once an extension of something greater, now found itself an individual, untethered, lost. Some screamed in confusion, unable to process the isolation. Some fled into the void, seeking a return to the unity that no longer existed. And others, realizing the terrifying enormity of their newfound autonomy, turned on one another. The Dominion collapsed overnight. The empire that had once crushed civilizations dissolved into warring factions, scattered remnants fighting to make sense of a universe that no longer spoke to them as one. Some sought revenge, their rage untethered and irrational. Others sought refuge, desperate to learn how to exist without a guiding voice. And humanity stood victorious, not through extermination, through evolution. The Zerathin Dominion collapsed in a single night, its once indomitable empire shattering under the weight of its own unraveling mind. A species that had moved as one, thought as one, fought as one, now found itself cast into individuality. The unity that had defined them, the perfect synchronization that had made them conquerors, had been severed beyond repair. Johann Brun Him Dahi. Across their broken fleets, chaos erupted. Some froze in confusion, unable to function without the commands that had once driven them. Others lashed out in blind fury, seeking an enemy that no longer existed, their own ships becoming targets of their unprocessed rage. Some fled into the darkness, seeking a way to reconnect, to undo what had been done, to rebuild what had been lost. But among them, a few paused. A few saw for the first time not the will of the collective, but their own thoughts. Not a directive handed down from the hive, but a choice. And that realization, to those who could grasp it, was more terrifying than the war itself. On Earth, in the silence of the war room, Elias Voss watched the end of the war. The victory felt hollow. The Zerathin had not been destroyed, they had been remade, thrown into an existence they had never chosen, never prepared for. He had spent his career anticipating war, learning how to fight, how to survive, how to win. But this was something else. Had humanity truly won, or had it merely created something new, something unpredictable? What was worse, an empire of conquerors, or a species in existential crisis? His eyes drifted to the tactical readouts, to the scattered fleets, to the remnants of an enemy that no longer knew what it was. What happens when a conqueror no longer knows what it means to conquer? The galaxy would not remain silent. Some Zerathin, those who had been closest to individuality before the collapse, sought refuge among humanity. They came not as invaders nor as warriors, but as pilgrims, seeking to understand the alien concept of self. They were not all welcome. Others were less forgiving. Fractured warlords, once mere extensions of the Dominion, now ruled shattered fleets with their own newfound autonomy. They did not mourn the loss of the hive. They raged against it, vowing vengeance against those who had reduced them to this. There would be no peace, not truly. The balance of power in the galaxy had shifted, and the universe had been watching. Across the vast silence of deep space, signals pulsed, sent by eyes that had never before turned toward humanity. Observers, distant empires, old powers that had once ignored the minor species from the blue planet, now acknowledged them. A single transmission arrived. No encryption, no coordinates, only a message. We have seen what you have done. We are coming. Victory was not the end. It was only the beginning. Humanity had stepped forward into a future it did not yet understand. And on the bridge of the indomitable, Elias Voss stood staring into the void, knowing that the real battle had just begun. Victory came with cheers, with banners raised high above the wounded earth and the scattered colonies. Cities bathed in artificial light, people poured into the streets, and the void beyond was filled with the distant echoes of relief. Humanity had done the impossible. They had stood against an empire that had never known defeat and shattered it. The Zerathin were no longer a threat. The war was over. And yet, for some, there was no celebration. Elias Voss stood at the edge of the Indomitable's bridge, eyes fixed on the abyss beyond the viewport. The stars, cold and unchanging, stretched endlessly before him, indifferent to the war that had just reshaped the balance of the galaxy. The cost of survival weighed heavy, unseen by the cheering masses, but undeniable in the silence of those who had pulled the trigger on an entire species' identity. The Zerathin had not been annihilated, but what remained of them? Would they ever recover? Or had humanity merely replaced one kind of enemy with another? One more fractured, more unpredictable, more dangerous. The war had been necessary. The survival of Earth had demanded it. But survival, as always, came with consequences. And the universe had been watching. The first transmission came as a whisper through the deep space relays, an intrusion into the vast array of sensors that now monitored the void for remnants of the shattered empire. The signal was unlike anything encountered before. Not Zerathin, not any known language, yet it carried the unmistakable weight of intelligence. The message was simple: we have seen what you've done. The silence that followed was deeper than the void itself. There was no warning, no demand, no threat, no declaration of war, no offer of peace, just the weight of something watching, evaluating, deciding. It was not the words themselves that sent a chill through the analysts who read them, nor the UEN command who gathered in hushed, urgent meetings. It was the tone, not of fear, nor admiration, but of something else entirely. Judgment. This was not an introduction. Whoever had sent it had already been watching. For how long? And what did they see? Did they see the desperate struggle of a species clawing its way to survival, refusing to bow? Did they see ingenuity, resilience, and the ruthless adaptability that had turned the tide of war? Or did they see something else? Elias Voss exhaled slowly. There was nothing to do but face it. The message, the war, the future that lay beyond the next decision. They thought they had the advantage, they always do, but they never realized. A moment of silence. We were always ahead. As the transmission faded into the vast, unforgiving dark, the universe seemed to hold its breath. Waiting. What? The real battle had not even begun.